Beautiful. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tyngsborough Zoning Review Committee meeting of November 14th, 2023. This meeting is being conducted remotely online through the Zoom meeting app, and public participation is encouraged through the app or by phone. This is in accordance with the extension of the COVID pandemic provisions, allowing remote public meetings by the General Court through March 31st, 2025, per Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. First up on the agenda is we have discussion feedback received during the MBTA Communities Information Session, which we held on November the 8th. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric and to Mike.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So as he mentioned, we had an information session last week. We had several residents in attendance. We had opinions expressed on support for additional developable area for housing. We had opposing views about the impacts of multifamily housing on the community. We answered quite a few questions, and that video is going to be posted on our website shortly. It was just finished processing by Tyngsborough Media today. It was approximately 1 hour, but we're also planning to record a shorter explainer video that addresses a lot of the topics that came up that night into a shorter format. Since a lot of the negative feedback that came through had more to do with, I guess, clarifying some of the requirements from the state to the town, answering questions with regards to impacts, what our options were. I'd like to shift the focus just slightly over to some of the supportive comments that were received. We did have residents in attendance that were responding to some of the information about how the committee selected its 3 sub-district areas that make up the MBTA Communities District. As a refresher, Scenario A is the scenario that was selected by the Zoning Review Committee at the moment in response to the scenario report that NIMCOG provided. And that's the second draft that was revised based on original feedback that NIMCOG received from the Zoning Review Committee. And the 3 non-contiguous sub-district areas are combining an area where the 40B development is on Southern Middlesex Road. There's a portion of the Pheasant Lane Mall parking area that's on the east side of Middlesex Road, as well as a portion of industrial property that is on the west side of Middlesex Road, up behind Olive Garden. Some of the topics that were discussed last week had to do with the responses to the strategy that was explained to the public about how the Zoning Review Committee arrived at selecting those areas. I tried to explain that the community and the Zoning Review Committee itself wanted to minimize or at least manage the short-term impacts with regards to the immediate availability of development for housing. So a large portion of the district is occupied by recent development. So that takes away approximately half of the 50 required acres by the state. And the other 25 acres are made up by a combination of the 2 other parcels I mentioned, one side of Middlesex Road and the other. The larger of those 2 is on the parking lot side for the Pheasant Lane Mall. And there were concerns about the potential development impact there based on the planned casino that has been permitted at the Pheasant Lane Mall in the former Sears location. At the time, I wasn't 100% familiar with what portions of that fragmented area. When I say fragmented, it means that there's multiple owners of different parking areas within Tyngsborough and within Nashua. And I wasn't sure what portions of the MBTA Communities District that Tyngsborough selected may have been owned by the casino operator. So if I'm going to share my screen here briefly, I'm going to just bring up an image that I created to help explain some of the scenario. Let's just share my screen. All right. So what this shows, it's a couple of different color codings. The red box up here where ECNH Real Estate Holdings, that's the casino owner that's running the casino from the former Sears location. That none of that parking area that belongs to that organization is within the district boundaries, which is highlighted in this sort of like hot pink color. This orange section is a different gaming company that had purchased property at the Pheasant Lane Mall because there was some competition for the gaming licenses. So I'm not 100% sure the future of that portion of the parking lot. But the other three sections technically is this very large green area that sort of has a head up here in between the orange and the red, and then it swoops down with sort of wings on the left and the right. That's all owned by the Pheasant Lane Realty Trust, which is essentially the Simon Mall property. In the center there's a small portion that happens to be owned by a company called May Department Stores, which is actually Macy's. And then to the south, there is another parcel, and that's why there's additional lot lines surrounding it, that is also owned by the Pheasant Lane Realty Trust, or the Simon Mall, that the Bahama Breeze property occupies. The district boundaries span from a portion of the property behind Bahama Breeze, but is not associated with that parcel, extends north through the Macy's small section, which is where essentially it starts where they do the motorcycle training, goes up into I think what was formerly the mall employee parking area, and then extends west to Middlesex Road. So none of that district boundary is occupied by the casino owner operator. How that's going to affect future development, it's almost impossible for anybody to say. It's hard to tell exactly how much traffic that casino is going to draw on a regular basis. I thought it was promising about the fact that the zoning district itself sits in an area that's got good access to the light at the exit. It also has good access to the exit that is opposite of the 440 retail plaza. So I would say that section of the MBTA district is more developable than maybe was conveyed during the information session last week. We also have the opportunity to extend the district to the area where the Bahama Breeze property is occupying. One of the reasons why it was left off is because the state has suggested and essentially required, without a special exception, that our district boundaries follow lot lines. So the committee, as well as NIMCOG and myself, we weren't interested in selecting the Bahama Breeze parcel because we didn't want to jeopardize the Bahama Breeze retail building, essentially, the restaurant, the amenity. However, the town has received positive feedback from the Housing and Livable Communities Department at the state level for some of our large lots in our districts being split, so that we didn't have humongous tracts of land that are now, MBTA district. It helped us identify land areas that were of the scale required by the state legislation. So when I was talking with Mike Asciola at NIMCOG earlier today, we were talking about the possibility of proposing, or at least having the zoning review committee consider an addition to the square footage area at the Pheasant Lane Mall parking area to extend into a portion of the parcel occupied by Bahama Breeze in such a way that it doesn't jeopardize the retail component along Middlesex Road. One of the reasons why we were talking about that is there was feedback received from the public, attendees, as well as a resident who I think actually connected to our meeting this evening, who wrote a letter to the zoning review committee expressing their support for developable land so that housing can get constructed a little bit easier in the near term. And if I was going to quote, she said specifically, was urging the committee for more consideration to be placed on selecting areas that are immediately and realistically available for actual development. Particularly because I think she was concerned about the changes in the real estate market in this area since the plan's inception, because of the parking lot and the casino. At some point, if the committee chair wanted to have that person participate with the public, I did connect her so that she could speak in case that has any impact. But But that said, I've been speaking for a long time. I want the chair, I guess, to interact with the rest of the committee. I know Eric Eldridge, as well as Jeremy Baldwin were in attendance, and Chaz, you, I think, had a chance to watch the recording. So I'm kind of curious to hear some opinions from the rest of the zoning review committee, because there were also some opinions expressed for reconsideration of inclusion of some developable area down near Flint's Corner.
Well, thank you, Eric. On your map, is there a spot that we can see exactly what Tyngsborough owns?
Tyngsborough doesn't own anything.
Well, I mean, where our boundaries are, then I guess I should say.
Oh, hang on a second. I'll share it back up. This is specifically around the parking lot area.
Yeah, I'd like to just see where the
So that straight line that runs across the top is the state line.
Okay, that answers my question. So then,
Okay.
just above where that red, the EC New Hampshire, that it looks like there's a building up in there. That's Sears right there. The old
Correct.
Sears? Okay. All right. I'm well acclimated now. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I was not able to attend the meeting, but like I did watch it, and then a lot of the meeting really seemed to be more around understanding what MBTA communities are and what they're trying to be, and the mandates from the state and so forth. I was under the impression after watching it, yes, Flint's Corner came up, and that's something that we could certainly discuss at some point. But I think maybe Eric, you might be able to answer a little bit better if there's been any movement up there to try and resubmit any kind of plans or inquiries for Flint's Corner for development that could be done outside of or maybe even in conjunction with the MBTA communities.
Sure. Let me, I guess, share some of that. I have not had any promising conversations with the property owners there with regards to moving forward with the original proposed mixed use I guess site plan that the community had seen several years ago. That included around 96 condos being constructed between Tyngsborough and Flint's Corner in conjunction with some retail development at Flint's Corner. That project fell apart as property owners had changed. And I would say currently the capital markets are probably somewhat preventive with regards to them moving forward in the near term on that project. That said, I was brainstorming with NIMCOG earlier today. We do some updates after we have discussions with some state representatives in the housing community to talk about how we might want to respond or how to advise the zoning review committee so that you can rediscuss whether or not you'd like to include any of that area. And if you isolate just the area where there would have been residential development between Flint's Corner and Tyngsborough, you have approximately 6 acres. So that area would comply with the 5-acre minimum that the state has specified in its legislation. So you could add another 6 acres of ready to develop land in your MBTA communities district. In terms of what to consider and how that might impact things, on one hand, it's an area where the community has a reasonable expectation for residential development to happen within, let's just say, the next 10 years, maybe even within the next 3 to 5 years. So if you're in favor of much more residential development, you might want to exclude it from your MBTA communities district because the residential development might take place anyway. And now you've got another area where you've got multifamily housing available by right up in your MBTA district. On the other hand, or the opposing view would be if you did include it, it would make the multifamily development in that area by right, and it could potentially expedite the development of that housing. Also a positive for those that are looking for residential housing development to happen in the near term, as well as folks who are potentially opposed or concerned about how much residential development might be possible within the community in the short term. Because if you've included this area within your MBTA district, you've got another 6 acres that isn't covered by the district elsewhere. And it's in an area where residential housing might be likely to happen in the short term. So in some ways, I look at it as a win-win in that folks that want housing development to happen sooner, this makes it easier to happen. For the folks that want less residential housing development to happen, including it in your district means, you know, you're kind of counting likely housing to be developed inside your district.
All right, well, I'll open up to the board. Mr. Eldridge, any thoughts? You were at the meeting, so.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, part of it was making sure that people were informed as to, the process. I'm not sure whether we should provide a little bit more information as to how many meetings we had. We had a bunch of open meetings. It wasn't like these just came up. Perhaps we should talk about why we didn't choose some of the locations. I think the Flint's Corner location, one of the items that we didn't even talk about was the breakdown of that space. There was areas that had to be excluded. It's kind of a funky space, and I think that's what Eric's talking about by saying, okay, let's ignore that and just focus on the area between Tings Terry and Flint's Corner. That 6 acres, that is, more contiguous space that, looked a little bit better. Perhaps we could describe why we chose the 3 parcels that we did. I think there were folks that perhaps looked at it and said, we were looking at places where it wasn't going to be built, and that was not the case. In fact, what we were looking at was looking at 3 different places where if there was high density housing, that it would be more economically viable. It would be supporting economic growth in the commercial spaces that were there in the more of the northern corridor and along Middlesex Road. So, it's really hard in an hour, because I thought Eric and Mike did a really good job of covering a lot of content. And it's really hard to shrink down all the hours that we put into this into a 1-hour presentation that doesn't have people's eyes glazing over. My concern with looking at Flint's Corner at this hour would be we went through it and we did choose, I thought, 3 locations that were really good, and they have benefits in each of the 3, maybe at different times and at different ways. I think when we look at the area, the Pheasant Lane Mall that Eric was talking about, not really impacted by the casino. In fact, the space that we're talking about could actually be complementary to that, and that area, making it more viable, because we're not getting anything out of the casino. I think residents may be thinking that somehow we have some say, and we don't. When you look at our legal standing in there, we don't. But the other portions of that property that we're talking about could be something that might be a really good fit for a mixed use, with high density. You got the highway right there. You've got access to that commercial area that we're trying to grow and build. And I think that that is certainly something that has value. And then, the other area to the west of that, when 440 gets built out, when perhaps some of the warehouse pieces and other things are there may be opportunities for some mixed use in that, and that it's a balance. I think we all looked at it and said, gee, we want housing, we want to have some things, but it needs to be controlled. And there's a big difference between multifamily housing and 15 units per acre. And I think, what we spent a lot of time on was coming up with a balance in there to say, how can we do this in such a way that we're in compliance with the state law? And, we want to continue to do that. And I think we all agree, but it's a little bit more controlled. I know a lot of communities are struggling with this and are really concerned about rapid growth and things where we can't control much, and that the infrastructure can't hold it. I think, to go back and look at Flint as part of that, I think it's a little bit late in the game, and that we don't have a ton of opportunities between now and December 13th to really get to that point. So That would be my biggest concern in there. But I thought the session went well. Again, a lot of content, short period of time. Perhaps we could give a little bit more background on how we got here. But I thought that I was a little disappointed that there were only 4 people. But that's I can't control that. We tried, and I certainly hope that there'll be more participation in the next one that happens. But again, we can't control that.
So I think we really vetted the 3 districts that we decided to put this in very, very well. I don't see any need or desire to change or add anything to that. Of the 4 people that were there, I think they sort of understood that Flint's Corner really is not necessarily an option for us, or to replace anything that of the other 3. So I think we move ahead and just keep the 3 on the scenario A, and submit that to the state. Larry, Joe, any thoughts? Larry, let's go with you first. You're unmuted.
I would be supportive of what you just said. I agree with Eric. I think we are where we are for a reason, and we're in a relatively good spot. I have not had a chance to view the meeting yet. I did read the letter, and I guess it is hard to convey everything we've done so far to someone in a very short period of time. But she commented that she would doesn't want people to be homeless, and would rather overcrowd a school to prevent that. And this isn't what this is about. This is about reducing traffic into Boston with people that have jobs. So there's nothing that we're going to do or not do that is going to affect if somebody has a place to live. And we're following a rule and making we're complying with a request to have the district set out where we can have multifamily housing. That's kind of what we're doing. That's what we've done. I think we're in a relatively good spot.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Again, to reiterate, I think we want to meet the letter of the law without being so cumbersome that the state would find out that we're not in compliance because of what we're doing. Getting back to one of your original questions was the lower parcel near Bahama Breeze. I don't know how that would work, since the state would want us to stay within defined boundaries of current boundary lines. However, that would have to be changed so that we can actually keep our corridor intact. But one of my concerns was because of the topography. If we build on the front side or the northerly side of the Bahama Breeze parcel, it may be landlocked anyway. It may be such that we include that parcel with the parking lot, South Pheasant Lane parking lot, or we make sure that during the planning phase, we have access to that property in case it ever needed to be expanded upon. Getting back to the original the 3 parcels that we have, again, I would be amenable to either a partial addition of a partial from Tings Terry to Flint's. Again, I think a good statement was made by Eric. If it's, we were part of that original proposal for the mixed use development several years back, so we know that something is in the works there. If we were to include that, again, I would not be opposed to that either. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Joe.
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick
please, Eric.
response and or suggestion to maybe rope in Mike briefly to respond to Joe's comments. So I don't think any of the proposals are where we're at today, or any of the options that were described earlier would put the town at risk with regards to non-compliance with the state. And that was also part of the goal, of course, of submitting it to the state in December so that they have a chance to review it. And they committed to saying that if there was an issue, they're not just going to send back a blank non-compliance stamp. There would be specific guidance with regards to suggested changes or other elements. With regards to the land behind Bahama Breeze, I do want to point out that the state's been pretty amenable for communities that have larger parcels like Tyngsborough's to split those parcels. So they've made some exceptions with regards to following lot lines. And if the community did choose to omit the Bahama Breeze retail section along Middlesex Road, but include the land that's behind it, I wouldn't consider it landlocked, only because it'll be accessible through the MBTA district that runs from essentially the northern portion of that boundary all the way down through the Macy's department stores portion, all the way across the motorcycle training area into the area behind the Bahama Breeze. So just wanted to make sure that there was no fears with regards to either non-compliance or landlocking portions of the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Mike, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd spoken with the state before, in regards to kind of getting some reassurance about having the zone on land that's probably not going to be developable or redeveloped within the next 20 years or so. And I also brought in the two sub-districts that were in the northern Middlesex Road, the northern section of Middlesex Road, because they weren't they were part of parcels. They did they were a little not skeptical, but they did raise the access issue, but that would more likely we'd figure out a way. It's not going to be, it's beneficial to the property owner to have that to have access to that parcel. If not, it would become kind of without any real value for them. And as long as there was justification as to why the parcels were being split, they'd be amenable to approving it. And with large parcels and 15 units an acre, I think the justifications that using that to support the economic development of that Route 3 corridor would meet the level of scrutiny that they would put on it. So I think there are going to be a lot of communities that are taking the approach where they're really not zoning for near-term or mid-term multifamily housing development, and I think Tyngsborough is showing a good faith effort to use this to one, address the housing crisis, and to potentially have use it for an economic benefit for the town.
So are these just high-level talks that you've been having with the state?
It was basically I just had a kind of a they have open office hours bi-weekly, so I've been attending those, and then I had a Zoom meeting with two of the officials from EOHLC.
So the feedback that you've got and the districts that we've selected would certainly be in compliance, and you would expect that they would be approved?
I believe so.
Okay, good. Our work here is done. No. All right. I think that's good to know. Eric, anything else you want to discuss about the feedback, or?
Which one? Which Eric?
I'm sorry, Eric Solano.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess I just want to point out that if the committee, although I think the committee has expressed a lot of confidence in the district areas that have been evaluated, and it doesn't sound like there's a lot of popular sentiment for including areas between Tyngsborough and Flint's Corner, which is approximately 6.5 acres. I just did some quick measurements, and it's approximately the same amount of area if you added in the portion of the land behind Bahama Breeze and the additional sort of like access road area that runs behind Smoky Bones. It adds approximately 6 acres. So if the committee itself was looking for ways to respond to the public to add additional area, that's it's an option with regards, how much land you can add to the district in that section, about approximately 5 to 6 acres.
We have the acreage already covered at this point, correct?
You do. It's just that obviously the zoning review committee has expressed the desire for a strategy that limits short-term developable growth. And one of the ways it's done that is incorporated the 20, actually it's more like 27 acres, Mike. I can confirm that in just a second. Hang on. Yeah, 27.5 acres down on Middlesex Road, which leaves slightly less than half of the acreage required by the state to include in your district. Now, there's nothing non-compliant about that whatsoever. But one of the other ways that the zoning review committee has addressed or accomplished that strategy goal is to incorporate approximately 10.2 acres on the industrial side, on the west side of Middlesex Road, up behind Olive Garden, where the town is hoping to have the large warehouse constructed. It's been permitted. They've received a variance from the zoning board of appeals relatively recently. So I don't have any reason to believe that that project isn't going to move forward. So that acreage doesn't necessarily include, near-term developable land for the district, but it is compliant with the regulations that the state has already established and the guidelines that they've established. So I guess my point is, if the committee was interested in looking for additional areas to add short-term developable growth, there are options on the other side. I'm not saying that you have to consider it because you're not compliant or because you don't have enough acres or anything else. It's just a matter of responding to the first information session.
And one of the reasons we wanted to break it into 3 different areas is because we didn't want to be overwhelmed with development in one area. And adding that 6 acres could add up to what? 6 times 15, yeah. So 90 extra units. Certainly we would want to make sure we were careful with that. Mike, if in fact that parcel that's already been sort of designated as a warehouse does get developed, what happens at that point in time? Did the state come back and say, well, now you have to come up with another spot because you've lost that spot? You muted, Mike.
No, your zoning, it's compliance for zoning, not housing production.
Okay, good.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Because I think that there were, we've been dealing with that question for a while, right? It's like, it's zoning, it's not housing production. And I think it's also important that people understand that what we're doing with the MBTA communities zoning is one part of our zoning. So just because it's not in the MBTA and that 6-acre parcel doesn't mean that it can't be buildable. It just means that it goes through a different process and it's not by right. So if we look at it and as a town, we say, you know what, we'd like to have, and it's a mixed overlay, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's already in the mixed use overlay district, we can build there. But it's not part of the MBTA part as right. So, I think some people get hung up and say, oh, well, if it's not part of that, you can't have higher density housing. That's not true. It just means that it's not the 15 units per acre density by right. And that we could still choose to, maybe we look at it and say, you know what, I don't think that area can sustain that. That was an area where we had 96 units and there was some consternation on it, but we felt comfortable with it enough to get it approved. But now that we have the MBTA pieces, we might look at that and say, you know what, we don't want to have higher density in Flint's Corner. We might want to say, you know what, I'd like to have mixed use, but with something a little bit different, not quite the same density. But we are going to have more control over that. And that's why, you know, I think it's important for people to understand that we're not talking about limiting housing growth and multifamily growth as part of purely the MBTA. We have other options, and we've talked about that as a zoning review committee, that we need to adjust what some of our things are, what some of our bylaws are, to be a little bit more friendly in certain areas and compliant with the law. But, you know, I look at it and say, geez, if we had a fourth location, each time we had a location, there are folks who are going to look at it and say, no, not in my backyard. And, you know, I'm looking at it by saying, we did a lot of work. We were reasonable in our approach. We looked at the options that were there. And I think that it's a good combination of both short-term opportunity, longer-term opportunity, and then also the economic development side of those things, that I think if we start to look at breaking things up and doing some slight changes on those things at the 11th hour, I worry that our message is going to be inconsistent, and we might struggle a little bit more to get things approved. I think if we look at the 3 sites, we can say, look, we looked at all of these things. Yes, we believe in economic development. Yes, we believe in some residential growth, but it needs to have some parameters around it. And this accomplishes that, and it meets both the spirit and the intent and the letter of the law that Massachusetts has put in place.
Yeah. Well spoken. Thank you. Anything else we want to discuss on the feedback? Or are we good at this point and we can move on to the review language for the zoning bylaw?
Mr. Chair, I didn't know whether Eric and Mike had any thoughts on anything content-wise that they would change or whatever. I mean, it's like I said, when you're trying to jam a lot of things into 1 hour, I know that there were something. The only thing that, as I would suggest, is that we perhaps at least explain to people that we have had X number of meetings, X number of hours, and we looked at a lot of these options over a period of time. They might have a slightly different appreciation if they did understand some of that, but I didn't know whether there were other things that they got as feedback from people or others.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about this topic for over a year, so sometimes I forget, you know, when the public is starting their understanding of the topic. There were questions that came out in the information session about obviously confirming that it's zoning, not construction. You know, there were concerns about the district, the 27 acres down where the 40B development is. Somebody said, well, does that mean that these buildings are going to be knocked down? I mean, that's certainly not the case, right? It was not a question that I had anticipated, but somebody that was in attendance, wanted to make sure that folks were clear about that. So I'll work on some of the basics, in terms of alleviating some of the larger scale macro fears, and then work our way into some of the nuances with regards to the frequently asked questions and things like that. Overall, I would say that was probably the only question that came up that I didn't anticipate. Everything else was either questions I had heard before. I was glad to get them answered in the recording, and help get the information out to the public.
All right, good.
Yeah, granted that there granted there were only 4 people in attendance. It was refreshing because it's not a demographic that you normally see at those meetings 3 out of the 4, and for them to be vocal and come out and support of housing production. That's usually not what we're seeing when we're having these public forums. So it was definitely a good conversation, and it's nice to know that that the younger generation in Tyngsborough is active.
And I don't mean to press you, Mr. Chair. I mean, you do have 25% of the folks that were in attendance that night attending tonight's meeting. If you wanted to provide an opportunity for the public to speak who's attending tonight.
Sure.
It's up to them.
Yep. Yep. Let's open it up.
Okay. Thank you. So Amanda, I'm just going to push a button that says allow to talk, and then you just have to unmute yourself to participate.
Hello, how's the audio?
You sound good.
We're good, thank you.
Great. Well, I'm also the one who wrote the letter, so you kind of already have all my thoughts written down. So, did you have questions for the public, which I'm pleased to get to represent entirely?
I guess I had a question in that during the information session, like I said, it wasn't clear with regards to who owned what portions of the parking lot. I knew that it was fragmented. I knew who the owners were. I just wasn't sure who were the owners of the portions of the district area. So did the map that I had sent over by email and put on the screen earlier this evening help explain or maybe even alleviate some of your fears with regards to what type of obstacle the casino might pose to development for housing in Tyngsborough if that area was included in the MBTA communities district?
Yeah, it did, and I appreciate you sending that email also. But I know the diagrams have a lot of lines going on, so I did have to stare at them for a little bit before I could figure out what all of the colors meant, I'll admit. But I think my biggest fear was that with the casino potentially being built is that the areas that we own, or not we, but are part of Tyngsborough, that our parking lots may be more appealing to people who want to buy more parking space for a casino than for people who want to buy land to develop. Not necessarily that through business contracts it would be impossible for a developer to purchase that land and use it for housing, and also less appealing for people who want to just less appealing as a housing option to be next to a casino in general.
Okay. I can explain just a little bit with regards to how some of the real estate transactions might take place. The viability of the district land area that's been identified for Tyngsborough is owned by the Pheasant Lane Mall. So there might be some constraints with regards to what they have for tenant agreements. So when the casino signed an agreement with the mall, which I'm not privy to, it's a private agreement. I don't know if there were any constraints put on what the mall could do or couldn't do with regards to, their own parking spaces. Simon's a pretty big organization, and I think the opportunity represented to the casino to occupy the Sears area, I'm just guessing that the mall probably had an upper hand with regards to the negotiations. So I can check in with my contacts there to see if what's actually taking place, and is there a certain likelihood or any constraints on the parking areas that are within our district. But because it's two separate owners, typically if somebody wanted to take advantage of the zoning in Tyngsborough and develop housing or explore that type of development, it would be within their rights as long as there wasn't some other private agreement that prevented them from doing so. And in terms of like the casino's impact on the viability for either housing or other type of economic development, I wouldn't necessarily consider it all bad from an economic perspective. While the casino does draw a significant amount of traffic, that's not necessarily bad for Tyngsborough's retail corridor. In a lot of cases, that type of increased vehicular traffic, while you might potentially have a slightly longer line at a light, et cetera, is good for retail property values as well as overall demographics for visitation. And those numbers are similarly good with regards to additional types of development, whether it would be for a hotel that could potentially, be located in Tyngsborough, or residential housing. A casino isn't necessarily incompatible with multifamily housing development. So I don't want the public to, I guess, misunderstand or misconceive the casino's impact on the future potential for Tyngsborough's property, or property that is located in Tyngsborough in the northern retail corridor.
Okay, that makes sense.
I really appreciate your attendance last week and attending tonight as well. Thank you.
Sure.
Nope, you're muted, Chess.
My turn to unmute. Amanda, was there anything else that you wanted to comment with the committee on, or are you good, or?
No, I would say that is it. Only that, I mean,
Well, like Eric said, we certainly appreciate your input. You know, we do our best to do it to put this thing together, and having someone else's thoughts are much appreciated. So thank you for joining in with us tonight.
yeah. I will say though, before it talks saying that, you know, it's the 11th hour and it might be too late to be changing anything. If that were true, then would we even need the meeting at all? So if it seems to me that it is possible to make changes. You may decide, of course, you don't want to, but don't say that it's too late to make changes, or I guess I don't understand why we would have the meeting in general.
Well, I don't think it's too late to consider anything.
Of course.
If it is at the 11th hour. But as we kind of said earlier, we've been working on this thing for over a year, and we've examined all sorts of different areas in town to try and find the spots that would be the most viable for this type of housing. And I feel very strongly that the three that we have narrowed it down to does represent compliance with the state and great spots for the housing should it be developed.
Sure.
All right, any further comments on agenda item 1, or can we move on to agenda item 2? All right, let's move on to 2, which is the review language for the zoning bylaw. I guess I would turn this over to Mike, or back to you, Eric.
Let's make sure I'm not muted. Yeah, we can turn this over to Mike, and I can weigh in with regards to some of the items, I guess, that are left out there. There was a lot of discussion in some other communities about parking. I will say that I'm not expecting parking to be a big discussion item here, because the zoning review committee did a pretty good job hammering that out with Mike. We did want to sort of double confirm that we don't think that there's going to be any issue with maintaining the existing parking calculations that the town's already enforcing, which is 1 space for single and studio units and 2 spaces for anything with 2 bedrooms or more, which I think is what the committee wanted. Mike says that we shouldn't really have any trouble getting that through to the state. I do have notes on trying to work in some other elements, but I don't think we've really had time to work in items such as language that defines spaces for delivery trucks, space for buses to turn around. And those were really my big items that I wanted to try to work in. I've just been too busy with some other elements, but Mike might be able to convey some of the things that he's looking at there. NIMCOG is, since they've started working with Tyngsborough, have increased their participation with assisting some of our surrounding communities, including more recently Chelmsford, Dracut. I don't think you're working with Westford, but I think you were working with Pepperell.
Yeah, we're working with Westford. At Westford and Tyngsborough, we're basically doing just some lighter technical support and mapping and modeling.
Well, I do have another update, by the way. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mike, but from an inclusionary perspective, I have a positive update. So the Mass Housing Partnership, which is coordinating technical assistance for communities to comply with the MBTA communities legislation, I submitted a request for additional technical assistance for services that NIMCOG really didn't have the scope or resources to provide, which is to provide an economic analysis to help prove and support the community's request to go from the 10% maximum to the 12% requested for affordability for inclusion. That was a topic of conversation as well this morning when we had multiple communities communicating with state representatives or staff of the Housing and Livable Communities Department. Questions about whether or not the communities can round up, and if you wanted to set a certain minimum size or minimum number of units for a project proposal to match up with your inclusionary zoning. So let me explain a little bit of what I mean. In Tyngsborough, if we're aiming and anticipating an approval for 12% for inclusionary zoning, what number of units does it make sense for that to kick in at? It basically makes sense for it to kick in at 9, because that would represent 1 affordable unit. it might make sense for the community to also state that that is the minimum size for any proposed project. That way you don't have to figure out what to do with a fractional affordable unit for any development less than 9. And I thought that made sense, and I was encouraged by the fact that the HLC staff member didn't bat an eye or flinch with regards to having a minimum project size regulated in your MBTA zoning language. So I'd like to get some feedback from the committee to confirm that I'm not missing something, and that might be a direction you'd like to go with regards to including some language in the bylaw itself.
Currently, aren't we at 7?
We are, and actually, I mean, when you look at the way the inclusionary zoning bylaw is defined for all other development, even outside of MBTA communities, it does say it's 7, but if all of your development requires a 12%, that number doesn't really match up too well.
Right.
So I hear you, at least at 7, where if you're rounding up, you know, if you're at 7, you still have to create 1 unit. With the MBTA communities, what was difficult there is if you produced, let's just say you're going to propose 7 units to be developed somewhere, and the community said, okay, well, you're going to need to create an affordable unit. Well, now the affordable percentage of that project is at 14% because it's 1 out of 7.
Yep.
And somebody could potentially challenge that legally, saying, hey, the bylaw and the state said they could only force us to put up 12%, and you know that's greater than the percentage than they're asking us to put up a greater percentage than what the bylaw states. So we wanted to come up with a very clear way to make sure that the development community knew what was expected with regards to affordability as well as project scope. And Tyngsborough has pretty large district areas, so I didn't think it would be detrimental to have a minimum size project set at 9 units.
But it would just only be for the MBTA stuff, so. I guess we're all, it always makes me cringe when we have one bylaw that's one district that has one set of rules and another one that has another set of rules.
I hear you. From a planning perspective, it makes me a little queasy as well, but we're responding to a state mandate, and I understand that's also what makes some residents that are, you know, participating in this process, whether you're a committee member or maybe you're somebody that's going to be at town meeting trying to accept it, you know, state mandates are probably one of the harder items to zone for because, well, it's very hard to take all the situations for every community into consideration. So I hear you. We're doing our best to make sure that we get the town's interests represented in a clear and concise way, so that there's as little confusion as possible when somebody wants to investigate a development opportunity in the district.
So that having been said, it looks like 9 will be something that the state would accept and mandate along with this, or?
Not mandate for everybody else. They would accept it for Tyngsborough to say, any proposals for multifamily development in the MBTA district by right would have to be 9 units or more, so that you'd have 10% inclusion. Yeah. And it made sense. You wouldn't have a fractional unit that had to be rounded up.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else have any comments on that?
So just to piggyback off of that, we're still going to be looking for 12% as part of it. And so we're going to say a minimum of 9. And then in that case, they're only going to be, if they do 9, then we're only going to be at 10%. So it somewhat dilutes what we're doing, but it's not significant enough. Are we going to round up? So if they do 15, they're going to have to do 2. How are we going to be able to handle those types of situations? Because I don't want to have a minimum of 9, have them put in 15, and then only have 1 that's affordable, have it dilute what we're doing and works against what we're trying to do around inclusionary housing.
Yeah, we are. I will say that they didn't definitively say that this rounding was going to be a problem. They kind of punted with regards to their response because they only had half of their staff represented on the call. So they were waiting to weigh in with somebody else to say whether or not a community could legally require a rounding up of that number. I think that it makes sense to include that language in the town's legislation or the town's bylaw.
Because that's the way we have it now, that everything gets rounded up to the next number, so.
I think there's a difference though, where because there's a maximum with, that the state's allowing, that rounding up could go over the maximum allowed. Whereas when we're talking about like 40Bs, the 25 is more of a minimum. So rounding up for more units isn't really a burden to a developer in this case, overburden, if that makes sense.
So you would think that the state would want them to round up then, is that what you're saying, Mike?
No, I'm saying the state is probably not going to approve any percentage that's above either the 10% or what the EFA, whatever your EFA is approved at. If it's 12%, I don't think they would, if the rounding up increases the number to be 20 or 15% instead of 12%, they may have, that may be an issue. But I think it's only going to come up in a small amount, if at all.
Well, and this is where I run into the challenge with the state. This is another thing that the state, if the state has a problem with affordable housing, when a town is trying to do something to help with affordable housing, they are working against us. And I get it, because we want it to be appealing for the developer to go and build. But by the same token, the town has worked very hard to get to above 10%. And now the state themselves are putting that in jeopardy. And it's crazy that they would do that. And I'd love to say that this is the only time that the state does that type of thing, but they do it often. But I would rather go in and say, look, we're going to be at 12%, and we're going to round up when you have anything above that, and have them come back to us and say, oh no, you can't do that, rather than us starting with a watered down version. Because as I said, I would be more than happy to have that explanation to, the state, and sit there and say, look, do you want to have affordable housing? Because we agree that affordable housing is important in our community, and we've invested a lot of time in that. And yet what you're doing is trying to facilitate things for developers so that somehow we're more at risk for a 40 to, getting below 10%, so that 40Bs come in and that works for developers. It doesn't work for affordable housing. So, I mean, I look at it and say, I would rather we be aggressive with that and sit there and say, look, we're at 12%, and it's not like we're treating MBTA developers differently. This is what we've done because we believe it's important for our community, and that we will have that. If somebody wants to challenge it, okay, then that's fine. But I wouldn't want to, water it down. And I don't think we should be sacrificing and putting risk of the affordable housing percentage. That's my opinion.
No, and I totally agree. And nothing that I was describing waters down any of the objectives that the zoning review committee or the public from Tyngsborough has purported. So I'm a staunch defender of the 12% and, the zoning review committee's request to the state. That's why we're going through the process to create that FEA. And I also agree that we would be recommending a rounding up wherever possible. I guess this really just goes all the way back down to whether or not you'd like to have a minimum project size for proposals. If you don't care, we can just move on. I'm sorry,
You're on mute.
What if somebody was going to be putting in a proposal for 5 units?
Right, exactly.
Right. So it would have to be one affordable up to 7, then after 7 or 8, there's going to be a sub-calculation that maybe in our zoning bylaw, we have I'm not going to say a sliding scale, but there should be a separate calculation for that number of units being developed. So
But is
that's
there
not actually a hard number, but
Is
we're
there a
going to offer a
drawback?
range that depending on the number of units being built, we need to have our 12% plus or minus a certain percentage.
Considering the size and the location of the district, though, is there a drawback that I'm not seeing to the community by having a minimum project size of like 9 or 10?
Not in my mind.
That way you don't have to have such a loquacious way of saying it's got to be 1 for 1 to 9. Then it just says, hey, if you want to start building multifamily projects in town, we want to make sure you're serious. It's got to be this many. I mean, I don't personally, I think that if and when the community actually sees a proposal, it's going to be quite a bit larger than 10. We're just trying to take into consideration all the scenarios because you could subdivide or something else.
Or you could have multiple developers in one particular parcel.
Sure.
How do you deal with that?
Right. I mean, at least in that particular case, the community would say that the projects that it's going to consider have to be X number of units.
They do an LLC, Joe. They can combine any way they want, but we're going to be dealing with one entity, one legal entity.
Mike, you look like you wanted to.
Yeah,
I mean, we do have a lot of owners of that parcel south of Pheasant Lane.
It's
think with
actually
the-
only one owner for the whole district that we've
Signed
Oh,
in.
one master owner. I thought it had separate. They were separate subdivided.
So
Parcels.
in the parking areas that are in Tyngsborough, south of the mall, it does have fragmented ownership, but the district that's been identified for MBTA communities in Tyngsborough only has one owner for that land. Oh, my mistake. 2, Macy's and
Macy's.
sorry.
yeah, I think it does make sense in this situation where you have the larger parcels. It'll lead to a more, I think, cohesive development of the overlay district rather than maybe someone coming in, subdividing, and then putting, maybe the minimum they could do would be a duplex and a single family house. It would be considered a multifamily by definition, and then they just condo it, and it's that could be a kind of a go around, and then you also wouldn't get any you'd be losing ground in your SHI in those kind of cases, so there'd be a protection against that with the minimum project size.
So is 9 the magic number for a minimum? I mean, I agree that anybody who's gonna come in is not gonna stop at 9, they're gonna want more. Do we set it higher then, or what are the thoughts of the committee on that?
When I actually do the math, I mean, technically it should be 1 out of 8. 12% of 9 is 1, but 1 out of 8 is 12.5%. So,
But I mean, for the overall development of the parcel, can we say that, okay, if you're coming in here, you're gonna have to do at least 15 per acre or set it?
well, density is different than the size of the project, right? So the legislation requires us to allow the density by right. So 15 units per acre, that's what's allowable. I don't think the community wants to require it. So if somebody wanted to come in and their vision was 10 units an acre, great, go ahead. I don't think it would be in the town's best interest to regulate it that way, but it's regulated in that this is what is up to that number is what's permissible by right.
I just
what
go
we're
back to Mike's thoughts of, okay, all of a sudden, you've got 3 housing units spread across this entire district or whatever, and I mean, I guess that wouldn't be economically feasible, but how do we?
The only way that would work for that small number of homes, I mean, I guess you could do that for some reason, but I mean, economically, it makes 0 sense.
Right.
But
Yeah.
you could subdivide.
And if you were
Subdivide,
gonna,
and then it'd be each.
right, and if you were going to subdivide, I mean, it would really be up to the developer to decide what density they wanted to develop at, up to 15 units per acre, and I don't see why they wouldn't maximize it.
I would go with the 8 minimum with 1 unit affordable. That would give you the 12.5%.
I like it.
Yep, okay.
I think your EFH would have to be at 12.5% is the only, and not 12.
Because I think the thinking around the 9 was that, look, you're gonna have 9, one's affordable, you're at 11.1%, which, okay, it's less than our 12, but that's just the minimum size. I think one of the things, and I don't know how people are gonna do this, but it could be, I don't want to get below 11%, right? The
Yep.
12 is where we are. And so I look at that. But if we had to have something where a developer was going in and they wanted to do 100 units, and we were to sit there and say, you know what, I need you to put in for 100 units, you're going to have to put in 12. If we were to sit there and say, oh, well, no, 11 might work for us. As long as it's above 11, I'm not diluting what I've got because I'm at 10 point something right now. The
Right.
12, I like. The 12.5, we might get some pushback if we say 8. That was my understanding of why we went with the 9, with 1 being affordable, because that at least gets us to the point where it's less likely to be challenged.
I'd like to
I
push
have-
it to
I
what
have
they
a-
say.
I think
Just,
when I'm playing with the calculator here with 12.5%, from a builder's perspective, I'm wondering if it's actually quite convenient, because it would be 1 affordable unit for every 8, and it's an even number if you're going to be developing condos or buildings. Like we can see the affordable apartments getting developed on the south side of the Toll Brothers project. It's 2 buildings of 8. That's a good developable number. And I think it's builder friendly. So that's a message I'd want to try to get across from our consultant, pitching it to the state. So maybe we just got you an extra 0.5%.
Yeah, that you're right, because we went round and round with Toll Brothers about how to build those, because we needed 15 units and we got the 16. So because that's the way you got to build them.
Yep. I mean, I would say if you made that argument, you know, to the people that were really making these guidelines and everything else, maybe 12.5% would have been where they set the limit, not 10. But anyway, that's just me. If you were trying to make it builder friendly and make it make sense, I like where that number landed.
I'm good as long as it doesn't get challenged and we keep our affordable housing well above the 10%.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. That needs to be protected. Anything else, Eric, that you wanted to add to make sure we get covered in the?
Well, one of the things I didn't get to ask Mike earlier was I'm trying to leverage the experience that NIMCOG is getting from working with other communities. So without introducing unnecessary conflict or unnecessary, issues that Tyngsborough is not dealing with, is there anything that other communities have come up with, or you've helped communities come up with that you haven't already introduced to Tyngsborough?
I don't think so. I think we've got some of the more innovative approaches with Tyngsborough, where looking at kind of taking advantage of larger parcels and in kind of commercial and industrial corridors. It's definitely a unique community, Tyngsborough, comparative to the other communities that we're working with, where a lot of them are kind of built out and it's a lot of infill, or I think we're doing a good job of taking advantage of potential opportunities here. And the MBTA communities was meant to kind of do create complete neighborhoods, maybe walkable neighborhoods, but that's really not that applicable to Tyngsborough. So I think we've had some good techniques to maybe not do, and with the increased parking, a lot of communities are doing maybe 1 space per unit, but it's really not very practical in these situations. So I think we're doing a you're doing a pretty good job of using of making this work for Tyngsborough in
Right.
unique circumstances.
Right,
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
please do.
I don't know that, did we come up with an approach to incentives? So for example, we had talked about perhaps if, and I don't know whether we can do this for just one of those districts, but for example, if in one of the districts we said, look, we would like to give an incentive to a builder that if they do mixed use with commercial on the bottom, will allow them to go to a 4th story. In that, I don't know that we ever came to a resolution on that as to whether we can do it for just one district. And if so, whether we would consider that for one of our districts. Because I know it's open in my mind, and I don't know if we had anything on there, and if so, how we would phrase that and vet that with like public safety and a variety of other folks.
Well, Eric, you got any thoughts on that? I mean, I know we had discussed it and I thought that we had decided we did not want to do that. I'm not sure whether it was in this forum or another forum that I'm speaking about, but I think our bylaws are 36 feet and I thought we had wanted to keep it at that, so. Anybody
Yeah, I
else?
remember Adriana weighing in on some of that, explaining that from a development perspective, they certainly would want that 4th floor. If the community feels like it's a good trade-off with regards to building height for that type of development, it's something that I can continue to explore with Mike.
To add a little bit of context, Mr. Chair, because I thought Adriana did say that it might be something that developers would look forward to. I was originally reticent because I was concerned about the public safety issue. I don't know what we ended up in Flint's Corner, whether that was a 4th story, because I think originally that was discussed, so we didn't do that. But one of the things that we had talked about is the sight line. If we were to do the one just south of the Pheasant Lane Mall, because that's down in an area, it wouldn't change the character and where it is. And I haven't talked to all the public safety folks, but I did talk to some of the some folks on fire, and their thoughts on it. They had less of an issue with it because of where it is. Because it's right on the border of Nashua, we'd immediately be having Nashua responding, and they have the bigger trucks to do that. So it's less of an issue in that location versus somewhere else. But I didn't know whether we had come up ultimately with a decision on that, because I know I was against it, and I'm on the fence still. So if it's off the table in everybody else's mind, I'm fine with that. I didn't know whether we had come to a resolution on that.
You're right, we did discuss it, and I don't know that we came to a resolution or not. I just would hate to open that door and then have this thing all of a sudden become, okay, well, we can, we'll just go to the ZBA and have them approve this, and then all of a sudden the cat's out of the barn, the cow's out of the barn, whatever that saying is.
No, ZBA wouldn't do that, would they, Chaz?
Thank you, Joe. But I just, like I said, we have bylaws in place in town, and I would like to see them left the way they are, at least as far as the building height goes. Personally, that's my opinion. Joe, did you have a different opinion, or?
In this case, I'm along with Eric, Mr. Eldridge, and I have no opinion either way. I don't know if this would be something that would be separate from the housing portion of it, that it would have to go before, again, there might be a small segment that would have to go before planning. even though it's by right, housing is by right, but it may have to be approved separately.
It would need to be approved by planning, yes, but
Yes, so
by right, it gives us a lot less leeway to help form the project, so.
You could make it by right, you could limit the by right uses for the bottom floor. And then just govern it by site plan review.
but then you get into a whole other ballgame of loading docks and access points and things like parking, more parking, things like that. So it gets a little more problematic. It's not that simple. Yeah.
Well, the parking, you could just tie the requirement to the existing additional uses for non-residential.
And we wouldn't need to tie that out to the entire districts that we're creating. We have to set up, have a whole.
You could
set of-
limit
You
it.
can make it specific for the sub-district.
But wouldn't that be something we would need to talk about now and have that part of the bylaw? I think we would have to. And I'm not looking to put that kind of burden on this committee and have everything ready to go for submission next month. So I would suggest we just leave that alone and not go down that road.
I agree with you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we could add this later, right? Because we're not, we'd still have the same zoning. We'd actually be enhancing it. My guess is that the state would, they're going to review it either way because it's a bylaw change, right? Whether it is more scrutiny, I doubt that they would have any issues if we're giving further incentives and those types of things. So I think it's very low risk to say, you know what, let's take it under advisement. Let's see whether we need to do anything, and we could put that on a future, future bylaw amendment, town meeting article in a couple of years or whatever.
Okay.
They're not gonna reject us because we don't have it. So it's not a compliance issue if we don't have it.
Right, so we don't need it.
Don't need it.
I don't know why we would want to entertain that at this point. Talk about the 11th hour. Oh, it's like now we have to come up with all sorts of parameters to have a fourth story. So yeah, let's leave that alone for now. Anything else we want to get into the zoning bylaw that we haven't addressed already? Mike, are we missing anything you need from us?
Actually, the one area that I did need some I guess some direction was going to be the mixed use component, and so any reference that we have in the draft bylaw we can remove. So that's fine. I did have the height as 43 stories and 40 feet. Because I think it in the B3, B4 and industrial it was 45 feet. What I might suggest would be that in the southern Middlesex sub-district, we go with 3 and 36, and then in the other two sub-districts that are to the northern Middlesex, we do 3 and 40, just because it's a little bit more, typically your ground floor is going to be about 14 feet, and then maybe 10 feet for each above that. And then there'd be a little bit more room for someone to do a pitched roof, and if you keep the height low at like 36 for a 3, you're probably going to get a lot more flat roof proposals. That's just something to keep in mind.
So currently we're 36 feet in R1, R2, R3, B1 and B2.
Yep.
And then B3 and 4 is 40. And then I1 is 45.
Yeah, I think you might want to think a little harder about this. I mean, if you have a 14-foot, for whatever reason, 14-foot first story, if you are trying to accommodate a 3-story building, all right, so I guess, nope, sorry, my mistake in terms of the math. I hit plus one too many times. I don't think I was going to say that a 45-foot height was going to be necessary to address a 3-story building, but 45 would probably accommodate a 4-story. Does that sound right, Mike?
Yeah, just about.
So the question is, for the developable area in, let's call it the Pheasant Lane Mall area district, is the building height, which is the sub district current zoning height, is 40 feet. Is there any reason or incentive that the zoning review committee has to increase it to the same height as the industrial district, which is 45? It's an extra 5 feet. I'm not saying that that's a reason to extend it. It's like, do you really gain anything by going from 40 to 45 when you talk about residential development? Unfortunately, I'm not 100% sure.
Not my area of expertise, but I think that going above 40, there might not be the benefit, and it might be something that people push back on, thinking, oh, I mean, do we say 3 stories and 40 feet, or do we just say 40 feet? So I would just be concerned about, if you go up to 45, are they going to try to shoehorn a 4th floor? Are we able to?
If you're saying 14 for the first floor and 10 feet for each successive floor, so a 3-story would be 34, right? And 34, and then add another story for the pitched roof, let's say another 10 or 12 feet, right? So that's 46, 45, 46. Now, if you were talking 4 stories, you could go dormered 4 stories or hip and go with a hip and a lower pitch. So I think the question being, you have to specify number of stories and height.
That's where I was headed too, Joe. Good point.
Yep. Yep.
So the question for us is to say 3 stories and 40 feet, or 3 stories, 45. I think the 40 is going at where we are in which district is it that has the 40 now?
B3, and yeah, B3 has a 40-foot district.
Right.
So that's what it's zoned for today. There's the possibility, and maybe Mike can weigh in on this, given his experience. If you had a 3-story and 45-foot building height limitation, does that give developers more architectural design flexibility? Like, is the town more likely to get more aesthetically pleasing buildings because there's more variables or like more room to work with?
Yeah, I think so. Some of the architectural features are usually exempt from height requirements. So, there could be like a gable that's a portion of it's slightly higher. Yeah, sometimes the building height can block views, but I think where we're talking about, especially those 2 sub-districts to the north, I don't think that's a real concern. So yeah, I would think.
All right,
I don't think there's a big difference between 40 and 45. I can do a little bit more research and see.
So we're talking about residential housing here, correct? And our residential is all 36 feet high. Now we're talking about going to 40, which opens up the possibility of adding more bedrooms to these units. Is that the road we want to go down? I don't think it is.
Well, I think what's appropriate is that your residential districts, those building heights really aren't necessarily, aside from the R3 district, I understand that R3 is designed for multifamily. You've got scale appropriateness, right? So you've got larger buildings in this retail corridor. You don't necessarily want to limit your overall building height just because your residential districts in other parts of the town are 36. You now want to impose that 36-foot height limitation in the MBTA district when the underlying zoning already has a larger building height available. So I think in general, Mike, myself, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Joe, but we were all looking at, is 40 appropriate or 45, not necessarily going the other direction with regards to the underlying zoning.
And I guess my point is that, all our residential is 36. Do we want to be looking at that side of the spectrum, or do we want to be looking at the industrial side of the spectrum, which would be 45? I think 40 is really probably where we should be without, it sits right in the middle of those two things, and we're really looking at this trying to be residential and not industrial. So
well, this is something, although we want to get, a fully baked product out to the state for review in December, this is something that Mike and I can go back and advise the zoning review committee on in December to set that number to something appropriate based on more concrete evidence with regards to construction standards and what's possible, what's not, what type of flexibility is there. I know that I personally become, I don't want to say defensive or concerned, but having heard plenty of applications in front of the planning board, I know that you're aesthetically sensitive, right? So I want to make sure that your zoning gives you as much aesthetic flexibility so that when you ask for architectural interest in your facades, you don't have the response from the builder saying, yeah, but your building height's only 40 feet or your building height's only this. I don't have enough room to do this pitched roof and everything else. So, if it seems like a 3-story building is what's appropriate, I guess the question is from an architectural design perspective, what building height is appropriate so that you have the most flexibility and best chance at aesthetically pleasing designs.
Yep, and I hear what you're saying, Eric, and I just I'd like to limit it to 40 feet maximum, and not let it go to 45. That's all. So that's my opinion. So yeah, do some more research. You and Mike get together and see what other communities are doing with that, and that'd be very helpful to have at the next meeting.
I think specifically, I'd probably try to reach out to somebody that has some experience in the architectural design industry, just to see what their experience is with regards to the design, right? So I mean, if they say, yep, 40 feet's more than enough that we need to work with for a 3-story residential building, I can do anything you'd want. Great, that's the answer you're probably looking for. If they say, well, 40 feet is a limitation for a 3-story building, we could potentially bring you an explanation from that professional for your consideration.
And I'd be interested in what they had to say about the 36 feet too, just so we have all three to compare when we bring this up again.
All right. Eric, do you want me to share my screen so we can go kind of through the document?
It's totally up to you, Mike, and the chair.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Oh, it's disabled.
Oh, hang on a second, just try now.
Great. Okay. All right. So let's see. So since the last time we reviewed this, I did add under purpose that to comply with the MBTA communities state law. The sub-districts down. I'm going through the definitions that were provided by the state. There is a slight conflict from what is what's in the existing bylaw. So we may want to either amend the existing bylaw or just make this definition specific to this section. The mixed use development, there was a conflict between this language and what is in the existing bylaw, and it's kind of very specific to some kind of almost standards within that bylaw. But since we're not going to address mixed use development in this, we can eliminate this this definition altogether. So again, we can get rid of the sections related to special permit. One area that we can do is identify accessory uses within the mixed within the overlay district. So it could be like recreation facilities, cafes within the development. We could make that specific to kind of internal, or we can eliminate it altogether. Lounges, shared workspaces, other amenities. Oh, it does it does limit it to the use of residents and guests. We have the density is going to be at 15 units per acre. I did put a note too that it's just the MCMOD land area, just in case, because we are splitting parcels. We want to make sure we're clear that it's the densities derived from that that area only. With the height, we'll do a little bit more research and probably break it into. Do you think we should break it into sub-districts or have it as a kind of a one size fits all?
To Chaz's point, if we can minimize building height in the 40B area, I mean, it probably makes sense.
Yeah.
So addressing it, you know, I don't think we want a version of this zoning bylaw for every sub-district, but for areas where we want, for areas where it makes sense to regulate certain components, it makes sense to break it down with a table.
Okay. Yeah.
Did I read one of those things correctly where it says we can't limit the number of bedrooms?
Correct.
That's correct.
So I could build 100 units of 6-bedroom units as part of this?
Theoretically, yes.
Which comes back to the height of the building again. If we go 45, you're gonna be able to get extra bedrooms up there.
I think that,
Not if you're limiting it to 3 stories.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, 3 stories and, right,
And
40
roof.
feet or whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just saying, that's gonna be something that we're gonna have to address. Right, you know, the number of bedrooms, because if you've got a bunch of these units that are going in, and I have 750 units with no cap on the bedrooms.
I think it's going to be the market's going to kind of determine the number of bedrooms.
But 4 bedrooms are not uncommon now, and like when you see them
yeah.
in 40Bs and things like that, and it's going to be,
Well,
that's something that,
there are a lot more home offices now too, so that's also a possibility.
Mhm.
Let's see.
so should we set that standard now? No more than 4 bedrooms?
The
can't-
legislation prevents the community from setting a limit on the number of bedrooms in the MBTA communities district.
Okay. Never mind then, yep.
So the number of parking spaces, we did change this to studio and 1 bedroom at one per unit, and then 2 or more with 2 spaces per unit. We modeled the district with 1.5 parking spaces, and I was told by the state if you do have separate or have different parking requirements per bedroom, it would be allowed, but you have to kind of figure out, kind of take the average to model it. So but it worked out pretty perfect. So we didn't have to change anything in the model here. So then parking, the other parking, we can eliminate all the references to mixed use. The bike storage we went over last time. The threshold of 20 one EV per 20 parking spaces. And then all this language was in there the last time, with street trees and parking location, open space. Snow storage areas. And more mixed use to get rid of. We can also get rid of the infill lots, seeing we don't have really a district that's in an established neighborhood with smaller lots than like a traditional neighborhood. One area I think we should address, though, is parking structures. In the state guidelines, they do have a use for a parking structure to be allowed. Personally, I think it's not a bad thing if it's a parking structure that's that's servicing the exclusively the development. It could, it's going to save the land area, and could be potentially more open space on the lot.
Are other communities doing that? I mean, it seems that at 15 per acre, you haven't got a lot of room to do anything anyway.
Yeah. The only place really where this came up was in Bellrica, where they are looking to maybe include the mills that are right around the train station. So they thought, they've discussed the parking structure, but other than that, it hasn't been discussed. But also, we're kind of ahead of where everyone else is so far.
So so they're gonna repurpose the mills to be MBTA housing and then build a parking lot on
Well,
parking area then, or
potentially it could be, it would be on the developer or the property owner to do that. But yeah, it would be, they would have the density. Actually, they're looking at about a 50 unit to an acre density because of the size of the
okay.
I don't think it'll ever, I mean, they're proposing the ordinance. I don't think you'll ever be able to physically fit that on the property, but that,
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. So other than that, it would get into the affordability requirements, which we've talked about, and we'll make adjustments based on the conversations we had today, and then also adding in potentially the minimum unit requirement for the project. One question that did come up was the who'd be in charge of who'd be the administration responsible for this section of the ordinance. So would that be the town planner, Eric, planning director, or is that the building inspector or zoning enforcement officer?
Our building commissioner is our zoning enforcement officer.
Okay. How would it be should I leave it as zoning enforcement officer, or?
I mean, to be honest, I really think it's redundant because the zoning
Yeah.
bylaw defines it specifically, so I'll probably be making a move to strike that.
Okay. Let's see. And then we go through it into the site plan review language. There are no changes to at this point. So yeah, I think we're getting to a point where we're almost done with the amendments to the zoning here. So we could probably have this wrapped up in the next couple of days and have it final. Have a final draft for your review.
That'd be great.
Mike, if you have any extra time for us to go through this, my schedule is pretty flexible on Thursday.
Let me see.
You don't have to check your calendar now. I'm just letting you know before we get disconnected, but we don't have to set it during this recorded meeting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it should yeah, should have time on Thursday. So yeah, if you have any other questions or areas that you want to discuss, yeah, we could do that now before Eric and I try to wrap it up this week.
Yeah, I've just got a bunch of notes and everything scribbled on this original one that we had, so I'm very eager to see the completed revised edition, and
Okay.
if we do have any comments and so forth, then the committee can send those to Eric, and you two can kind of go back and forth on them and see what we can come up with for a final document before we I guess we're gonna meet again on the 12th. But we
I'll
also
see what we can do to get a revised draft out to you guys so you'll have something to review during the Thanksgiving break. I know everybody's looking for something to do after turkey, right? But
yeah, that'd be great if we could.
it is a little bit of downtime, so that's good.
Yep, right. Terrific. And then we will so December 4th will be the outreach.
Right.
I will not be able to attend that meeting, I'm sorry. And then on the 12th, we'll have the final wrap up before on the 11th, the Board of Selectmen is gonna approve this, Eric, is that, or review it at least?
It's on the agenda for us to go through and do that. And I think the reason we had the 12th was just in case we needed to meet following that discussion. That was my understanding, is on the 12th was kind of optional, right?
I have it down as optional as well.
If something came up on either the public outreach session on the 4th or the select board meeting on the 11th, then we could have the 12th because we need to submit on the 13th, right?
Okay, so why don't let's leave that all in place then.
Yeah, play it by ear.
Yeah, and if need be, we will meet on the 12th. If we don't, well then, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year, all in one. Anything else we want to talk about tonight then, while we adjourn? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Good night, everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks.